How the people are doing. So, yes indeed, it is time for the videography comparison between the Xiaomi 12 Pro and the X80 Pro. Now, the photography comparison is already done, you can check it out using the links in the description, but, well, one of the things which was pretty obvious at that point is that, the X80 Pro's photography, very strong, obviously. Kind of a spoiler here, but anyways, thing is, the Xiaomi 12 Pro, I think, is gonna perform better. Like, this is just a speculation, but it might just perform better in videography, and that's basically what we had to find out. So let's jump right in. Alright, so we're starting off with selfie video on both phones as usual, and well, I mean, it's just 1080p on both, so it's kind of a bummer that we cannot go any higher to 4K. That is kind of the standard, at least it should be the standard for at least selfie video for all flagships in 2022 especially, but we don't really get that on either. We can go to 1080p 60 on the Xiaomi if that's something. As for dynamic range, as far as I can tell on the viewfinder at least, it doesn't look very good on Xiaomi. X80 is doing a slightly better job, but both phones actually have an HDR mode. And so now we have HDR turned on both phones. This is regular HDR, nothing like HDR 10 Plus or anything like that. But I would say it looks pretty good on the X80 still, for the most part at least. I'm not a huge fan of how it looks on the viewfinder of the Xiaomi 12 Pro. Now, if it changes a little bit later on, of course, I'll let you guys know. And as for audio quality as well, let you guys know soon enough. Alright, so now we're using the portrait video modes on both. It's called cinematic mode on the X80 Pro, and I guess just bokeh mode on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. But this is what we're getting, and I mean, for the most part, usually what it happens is that, edge detection isn't perfect for obvious reasons. It's quite a difficult thing to pull off, especially when you're just shooting video. Even the smallest imperfection can be problematic, so keeping that in mind, I'll obviously let you guys know how it looks on both, whether or not one of them is particularly better than the other or not. But yeah, I would say we still have a pretty long way to go to make this perfectly usable like regular 4K video, So for regular selfie video, I think it's pretty obvious that the X80 Pro is doing a far better job. Like, this wasn't even all that backlit, if I really think about it. But still, the Xiaomi, it's kind of all over the place right here. It definitely doesn't look good, and even though the resolution is the same, the X80 Pro also appears to preserve details a good bit better compared to the Xiaomi. It's got good contrast. I mean, overall, it is really good. Now, audio quality, for the most part, I kinda like the X80 Pro, which was doing some noise reduction but not too much to muffle my voice entirely. Now, Xiaomi's voice was technically a little bit clearer compared to the X80 Pro, but it also had a lot more background noise. As for the HDR mode on both phones, I guess it kind of caused even more problems for Xiaomi because it's really, like, sincerely overexposed right there. The X80, given the situation, it is definitely doing a much better job at handling the exposure. I mean, yeah, there are still parts of the video that are vastly overexposed, sure, but still, for the most part, X80 Pro is doing a much better job with the general contrast, and there's too much noise on the Xiaomi 12 Pro as well. So I think selfie video definitely goes to the X80. Honestly, I didn't really think that Xiaomi would suffer this much with selfie video. I presumed that it was going to be similar, but in case of cinematic video or portrait video on both phones, I would say that X80 is once again pulling ahead. There are some imperfections on the X80 Pro, but the general edge detection is nearly flawless compared to the Xiaomi 12 Pro, which just doesn't look very nice. It has a lot of fuzziness around the edges, and for the most part, it has a lot more mistakes, in a manner of speaking, when it comes to portrait video. Now that right there was a strong start if I've ever seen one for the X80 Pro. But for 4K video with the rear camera, things are much similar right now. There's only a real difference in colors and contrast. The X80 Pro, for the most part, has higher contrast, while the Xiaomi is actually doing a slightly better job at looking realistic in terms of contrast alone, because both are very vibrant in terms of the colors. Now, the X80, the color tones are slightly different compared to Xiaomi. They are, I believe, leaning a little bit more towards the natural look, but the vibrance is still pretty high, and if you like that look, I don't think you're going to be disappointed by either. Stabilization is also pretty nice, and it's a very similar story for the ultrawide camera, but there is a difference in colors, even compared to the main camera, and that's one of the things I don't really like to see. Like, if it's going to be vibrant, I would like all of the camera lenses to look vibrant, because now the Xiaomi looks very realistic if you ask me, and the X80, it does have lower vibrance, but it still has a high contrast. So I would say that if both phones looked similar, they would be easier to use and easier to predict the kind of video you're gonna get. Now 2x zoom on the other hand, well, there's quite a few differences here. On one hand with the X80, which is very stable, maybe because it has the gimbal stabilization in there as well, but it also has a ton of over sharpening. So much so that I almost feel like it's not even using the 2x telephoto zoom here. It's just cropping it on the main sensor. Maybe, I'm not entirely certain, but it sure looks like it. The Xiaomi on the other hand is doing a much better job with preserving realistic details, but it has problems of its own. We just have so many jerks make it into the video. Stabilization is just close to non-existent, and the focusing, it suffers quite a bit, as you can see right here. And up next we have 4K 60, and as you can see, it started pouring like it was the end of the earth. But nonetheless, the video comparison had to happen, so I had it out anyways. And well, here actually both are pretty similar, with the only real difference in stabilization, because I think Xiaomi is a little bit better with that. But other than that, you know, the rest of the differences in colors and contrast that we saw with 4K 30, it's basically the same across the board with 4K 60 from the main cameras at least. On the ultrawide camera, however, I think the stabilization problem is gone on the X80 for the most part, which is kind of weird to see, but you know, that's just the case. There are some jerks that make it into the X80. I think Xiaomi for the most part is going to give you more stable video with 4K 60 at least. But one thing that I do want to point out is that the contrast is really high on the X80. I mean, you can see it for yourself right here. It is definitely not very realistic. Obviously, the Xiaomi is doing a really good job at maintaining realistic exposure and contrast. I'm kind of leaning towards Xiaomi. Like personally, I like the Xiaomi a little bit better because of it. Very vibrant on both phones though. That is still constant. And up next for super steady video on both phones. Or super stable, whatever have you. This is with the main camera, and Xiaomi is not very good compared to the X80 at least. I was walking pretty fast, not really trying to keep my hands very stable, but comparatively, the X80 is definitely doing a much better job. Like, there are so many jerks making it into the Xiaomi 12 Pro. It definitely doesn't look particularly nice now, does it? But both phones do have an ultra-wide super stable mode. And well, I'm not sure what's going on with the Xiaomi 12 Pro. There's no stabilization on the Xiaomi for some odd reason. It really doesn't make any sense to me. And also the Xiaomi 12 Pro gives us 120 FPS with ultra-wide super stable video. I mean, I'm not really sure about the application here because it's so unstable that even when you slow it down, you're not exactly getting good video. X80 looks quite phenomenal if you ask me. But that amazing stabilization on the X80, it doesn't really make its way into 8K video. Now this is something that Xiaomi 12 Pro really shines at. 8K with just the main camera, that's all we get on both phones. I'm not sure why ultrawide 8K is gone, but for the most part, the Xiaomi 12 Pro is doing a far better job. You get highly detailed, beautiful 8K video that is also very well stabilized. Like, this is proper usable 8K video compared to a pretty shaky mess on the X80. Now of course, we couldn't exactly get a good dynamic range test going outdoors, so we're gonna do it behind locked doors. That sounds kind of weird, but nonetheless, we have Valentine here once again right opposite to the window, and well, I guess Xiaomi has a pretty major problem with focusing, especially on close-up subjects. As far as I can tell, the X80 is doing a far better job. I mean, it's kind of funny if you think about it, because I remember when I made the camera comparison between the X80 and the S22 Ultra for videos, I kind of thought the X80's focusing was slow, but this is a problem on another level on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. Now both phones also come with an HDR mode, not HDR 10 Plus or anything. I mean, yeah, you can use it on the X80 Pro, but it's gonna give you the exact same results as you're seeing right here when you transcode it to SDR at least. But yeah, for the most part, the X80 Pro's dynamic range technically improves, but the white balance it completely craps a bit. And we can say the similar thing for the Xiaomi 12 Pro's focusing, because I mean, the Xiaomi just gave up trying to focus on Valentine right here. So I think once again, even with pretty terrible white balance, the X80 Pro once again takes a win. And well, I was just so surprised by the focusing issues we've been having on Xiaomi that I just thought, let's just, you know, take a normal well-lit subject and try to do a closer focusing test, and it works quite well. Now on both phones, to be honest, both phones look really nice here, which is kind of surprising because given how much the Xiaomi was struggling in backlit conditions, I didn't really expect it to perform as well as it did here. So focusing works for the most part. It's a little conditional, you're gonna have issues only when there's a really high dynamic range situation going on. As for the ultrawide camera, I mean, there's not really much of a difference. You can't really use an Hdr modes either, so it doesn't exactly look particularly great, but it is very similar for both phones here. There is some noise, both have pretty high contrast as well, and for the most part, it's not gonna disappoint you as such, but it's not gonna blow your mind away either. And now for low light or nighttime video. Well, I must say that for 4K video, you're not gonna see a ton of difference. I really like that both phones are doing a really good job with the white balance. It's definitely really accurate here. I had expected one of them to kind of screw up, but that didn't really happen, and I'm quite glad it didn't. But that said, you're gonna have some issues with stabilization, some jerks are gonna make their way into it, noise, detail preservation problems, that's always gonna happen with low light. And they just get really elevated when you're using the ultrawide camera. I mean, the X80 looks completely faded, focusing is an issue, both have a ton of jerks making their way into the video. Details are almost absent entirely, and there's a ton of noise and artifacting going on both phones as expected, so ultrawide nighttime video, I would highly recommend not using it entirely. In its place, I would much rather say that you should use the night mode video we get on both phones. Now, X80 Pro is the only phone that I've used thus far which gives us 4K night mode video, and that's huge in my opinion because the detail preservation, I'm not sure what you're gonna see after YouTube compression, but to my eyes, on the big screen, it definitely is much sharper and much more detailed on the X80 Pro. Also, another thing I really like on the X80 is that it doesn't overexpose certain areas of the video, as we see on the Xiaomi 12 Pro now and again, and the overall noise levels are very similar, but I do think it's slightly lower on the X80 Pro. So for the most part, nighttime video I do think it's better on the X80, but that said, stabilization in certain instances at least looks a little bit better on the Xiaomi 12 Pro. That may be in part because it has a lower resolution, so that could be why it can stabilize the video a little bit better. Up next for details test, this is 4K 30, we're gonna zoom in to 500%. And well, for the most part, I would say the Xiaomi 12 Pro's detail preservation is much more realistic. It has less noise, and I really like the contrast that we have going on in general. And secondly, if you look at all those little black circles, you'll see that there is a halo, an over-sharpening halo rather, going on the X80 Pro. None of that is really making their way into the Xiaomi 12 Pro, so for the most part, detail preservation is definitely better on Xiaomi. But that said, do keep in mind, this is a 500% crop. Realistically, you're gonna not really see this huge of a difference if you were to even use these phones side by side. Now up next, we have the ultrawide camera, and well, surprisingly, when we zoom in, you'll notice that the X80 Pro is the one that's doing a slightly better job. We have better overall details. Now yes, there is some over sharpening happening as well on the X80 Pro, but compared to the Xiaomi, the overall digital artifacting that we get from noise reduction is very low on the X80. We have some noise, of course, but for the most part, I do think that the X80 is looking slightly better compared to the Xiaomi, for ultrawide at least. And now finally for 8K video. Now, I do want to point out that the Xiaomi's colors here, it was a pretty warm light that was falling on the subject here, and I do think Xiaomi is doing a really good job at representing it correctly, compared to the X80 Pro at least. But when we zoom in, there is definitely high detail on the Xiaomi 12 Pro here. I do see a lot more general sharpness and detail preservation happening, and it does look really nice on Xiaomi. And I mean, if you just factor in the fact that we get incredible stabilization on Xiaomi as well, it's just the go-to flagship for 8K video. It just looks good, it's very detailed, and it is incredibly stable. I mean, you can use it in place of 4K 30 and basically get away with it as long as, it's not a crazy backlit situation or anything like that. But with that said, last but not least, we have the slow motion on both. It is 1080p 240, and well, both are looking very similar, except for the fact that Xiaomi didn't exactly focus on the water itself. It's focusing, I guess, on the base of the glass for some very odd reason. I used tap to focus, but it didn't really help. But anyways, point is that both look very similar. it's not gonna disappoint you, is what I'm trying to say. Other than the focusing part, which is kind of an issue on the Xiaomi in certain instances. But regardless of that, I would say that slow motion is not gonna be a problem on either. It looks quite nice actually. So with that said, well, that was kind of unexpected if you ask me. Because I sincerely expected the Xiaomi 12 Pro to perform better than that. Like, the video quality on Xiaomi, it's not quite as good as I expected, not nearly enough. Like, if it is losing out to the X80 Pro, which is in general quite a photography centered flagship, then surely there is a bit of an issue here. Now I know the Xiaomi 12s Ultra is out. I mean, it's not out for everyone to buy yet, but I do hope that we can get our hands on that soon enough, because that is the real Xiaomi flagship of 2022, at least I think it is. Maybe they'll come out with something else, I don't know, in December or something. But anyways, my point is that given the situation, the Xiaomi 12 Pro's cameras are not looking very good in general, because photography was kind of, I guess, lukewarm in a manner of speaking, and finally, videos were not quite impressive either. So yeah, it's kind of disappointing on the Xiaomi 12 Pro here, but well, maybe the Ultra will do a far better job. Who knows? We'll find out when we get that phone, but I do hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Subscribe if you aren't already, hit that like button if you enjoyed it, and I'll be seeing you guys soon enough. Cheers!